I think we've spent a lot of time this morning focusing on great work, great projects, and getting an understanding of how we can do things better. I've got sort of 20 minutes, 25 minutes to talk about how we then actually get that out there and actually communicate it to people and to our consumers or our other stakeholders. Now, the first part about this is really understanding and trying to unpick why we want to communicate this. Why do we want to tell people about the great work that we are undertaking as businesses and as corporates? And I guess in the social license to operate area or sustainability area, there are two motivations for this. The first is sustainability in many contexts is about risk management and reputation management. So we operate in business, things will go wrong. How we deal with that and the trust and understanding and the openness to understand we have amongst our stakeholders is really vitally important. And this is where a lot of this contributes. The second side is the opportunity. We know there is an increasing proportion of businesses and consumers that are completely motivated in their choices as to who they will buy their products off and what price they will pay based on the social or environmental credentials of those products. So how do we make sure that those messages are being received by those audiences? So if we start about communications and communicating sustainability, it's actually no different to any other form of communications. So I'm not going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about how to develop a communications plan. But in summary, we need to understand first what it is we want to communicate and why. What are our objectives in communicating? We need to understand who our target audience is, who our market is, and their different needs in terms of that. So what is it we want them to know about our product, our service, our company, our credentials? We need to understand what the channels are that will allow us to reach them, and at what different times and what information we need to put into those channels. Now, my session this afternoon will be particularly talking about those channels, and there are some, I guess, idiosyncrasies about communicating sustainability that we need to consider. And then finally, what are the key messages that we want to get out there for people to hear, and the behaviours that we want them to change, so that in order that we can say that this is successful. And then the final point, which is what which was just touched on, is what are the measures? What does success look like? If we start by thinking about why is this important, we need to understand what the market actually is. Now, I believe that that the market, in terms of sustainability, those who are prepared to make purchases based on the social or environmental credentials of their products, is increasing really rapidly and is increasingly mainstream. So these figures are less and less relevant, but I think what is really important is it's a massive market, and it is no longer a marginal market. It is a really mainstream market that will differentiate and be prepared to pay a premium for products and services produced by firms that are doing the right thing. $35 billion market in the States, but also growing incredibly fast. In New Zealand, estimated at about 32%. But what that translates to is that last year it is estimated that 800,000 people switched products or services because of their concerns over the environmental or social sustainability credentials of the suppliers. So that starts to matter. That is a huge chunk of the market. So who are the customers? Who are the 32% in New Zealand? Internationally, and this probably doesn't show up too well on the screens, but internationally there is demographic profiling around what are called lohas, which are people who live the lifestyle of health and sustainability. Those, again, that will differentiate and will make their purchase decisions on the basis of the credentials of the company and the brand. We are rapidly working through, the leaders are there in New Zealand's context. The leaning actually is the mainstream market. The laggards won't get there. That's where the role of regulation and standards will be required to actually bring those people up. What do they actually look like? Well, unlike a lot of consumer marketing and things, it's really hard to say whether these people are 18 to 25 and male and those sorts of things, because they span all the demographic groups, all the income bands. There is a slight bias in the New Zealand context towards higher income, higher qualifications, more likely to be in major metropolitan areas, and a female and younger skew. That's really important because they are also huge consumers of consumer goods. They're also large consumers of media, higher than average, both print but also huge consumers of the electronic media. They're also really evangelical. They are the people that will talk to their friends and keep talking to their friends about actually how great a product is, or in particular how bad it is. The traditional adage is called the 333 rule. If you do something right, you'll tell 3 people. If it's done badly, you'll tell 33. Actually, in this case, it's probably 333. And the other thing that's been really interesting in terms of this group is, with the GFC, the move has been less about environmental and looking towards environmental causes, more to look towards social causes. And the reason for that is, when money is tight, people are looking for where can they have the most impact. They're not necessarily going to be able to solve global warming or major international issues by a single purchase decision, but they can make a change in terms of their community, getting involved in their school or their local community to do good. So they are looking towards that more local rather than global. So what does this actually all mean in terms of for the communications, for what we are trying to say? I use eight principles in terms of communicating sustainability. First being talk positively. Paint a clear picture of where we want to take people, what success looks like, and sell that dream. Don't continue to tell people that they're doing everything wrong and they're contributing to global doom. Talk about actually how they are contributing to a much more positive outcome and that their little contribution does matter. Use new words. I mean, sustainability is loaded. Carbon friendly, clean tech. That has been seen as just jargon and meaningless. Also, be careful about the use of percentages and figures. Be really cautious about saying that this product is 25% better or the impact is 30% lower. Be really careful. Again, it's really prone to switch people off. Talk with people or to people, not at them. We all hate being lectured and being told how bad we are. And again, the negative impact of us. Talk about the positive contribution that we can make, the simple steps that we can actually undertake to make a difference. Be open, honest, and transparent. Never tell half the story. As I said earlier, this is a really evangelical audience. They will unpick the story really rapidly and start telling everyone about it. And particularly now with social media and electronic media, it can spread really quickly. I mean, we've all experienced or seen, the issues that Cadbury faced. That's just an example of how quickly a story and a brand can be trashed. It also allows you to admit the areas where you can improve. If you're honest and open, particularly with this audience, they are accepting that you're not perfect, because they understand that business is on a journey and that we are all learning. But don't say you've got all the answers. Identify where you've got challenges or issues and talk about how you are working to address them and improve them. Stress the business case. Talk about the benefits, the advantages and the savings of doing this. People still think that doing the right thing does cost more, and that to make good choices actually has an additional cost. And if we see this particularly in things like energy efficiency and those sorts of things, yeah, there might be a slightly higher upfront cost 4 or 5 times as much for an efficient light bulb versus an inefficient one, but tell the business case about the life of that product and the overall savings. Put your money where your mouth is, but never overclaim. Never say that your product is going to be so much better than it actually is, because again, it comes back to this deeply cynical audience. I think there is still, in terms of, not just in terms of our low-hars market, but the market generally, there is scepticism about green stuff. There is scepticism that everything is greenwash. So only claim what you can back up, make that information clearly available, and don't overclaim. Tell stories. I like to say that you're not going to get something into the media or be able to get it into the media unless you can convince your skeptical 10-year-old child that is actually something of interest. So look at what the story is. Think about how you are going to convince that 10 or 11-year-old before they go to bed that this is something that matters to them and that's of interest to them. The average reading age that journalists write to is 12. So if you're still having to talk about tons of carbon or water, nitrogen and phosphorus levels in water or whatever, you're not going to be able to convince them, let alone get them to write about it for their readers. Also, make it desirable. Talk about the positives of the attributes of the product. I remember when I first became interested in sustainability in the 90s, if you bought organic produce, it meant actually it was a cabbage full of worms, but you were doing the right thing. People still think that it either costs more or the products are often inferior. The base level now is that sustainability and businesses that put themselves out as sustainability have to be at least as good as their competitors and those that are benchmarked against. And then you can tell the positives of the story or the positives of the company virtues. But make sure that base level, that you're not inferior and you're not just trying to sell something because you claim it is sustainable. Make it fun and attractive, not boring and complicated. And come back to it. What you're trying to do is to sell a better way of doing things. In terms of what this means in terms of the New Zealand media landscape and things, and I'd like to acknowledge my colleague Nikki Wright here, we've got the same frustration in terms of actually trying to sell sustainability and sustainability messages into a deeply cynical New Zealand media landscape. Many of the attributes that we think of as in that laggard or doubter space in terms of sustainability are represented by certainly the editors and the decision makers in many of our media outlets. So what we need to do is to constantly think about these principles and how do we make it compelling, not just for the journalist that we're selling or we're suggesting the story to, but to their editors and to their readers. So dropping words like talking about sustainability, a better environment, and focusing on things like the improvement in social outcomes, better place, the better participation and those sorts of things is far more likely. We also have very few environmental or science reporters left in New Zealand. Veronica Maduna from Radio New Zealand is now one of the few pure science reporters out there. So we're also talking, particularly at individual journalist level, to general reporters, not specialist reporters. So we need to assume that they have little or no background in terms of the issues. These journalists will be writing a story about sustainability or covering this, and then going back and writing a story about a car crash, and then later on in the afternoon writing a story about a school principal who's gone AWOL or whatever. In the space of a day, they need to take 3 stories from finding the idea to ready for going onto the page. So we need to work with them in terms of framing up the information that they need, understand what it is that they need, and provide it in a timely format that will allow them to actually produce a great story. Also, if they're going to invest the time in writing about your story, work with them in terms of a degree of exclusivity, so that they don't invest all the time and then their editor turns around and sort of says, yeah, but I just read about that in the rival publication, and those sorts of things. Then also understand who the different media are and why they matter. So it comes back to your point in terms of who are your stakeholders. So if you are trying to appeal to a business audience, something like the National Business Review, even though it has a very small readership, is quite powerful. So it's much more powerful because of things like clipping services and the fact that the articles are distributed. Whereas if you're trying to appeal to a consumer audience, actually something like Women's Weekly and many of what we call the trashy women's mags are incredibly powerful, and particularly at the time that they're often read, which is while people are queuing up at the supermarket or in the doctor's surgery and those sorts of things, reading last year's gossip. So again, come back to it, understand who your audience is, remembering that audience is increasingly mainstream, and trying to understand what messages will resonate in terms of changing that behaviour.